The last photograph my mother ever took of herself was in London. She's standing in front of Buckingham Palace, one hand raised toward the gray October sky, fingers spread open, not waving, not pointing, but reaching. Like she thought she could actually touch it, like the clouds were close enough. In the photo, she's small against the palace gates, wearing that ridiculous fleece-lined jacket she bought from a sporting goods store in Portland because she read online that England was cold. She's grinning at the camera with the concentrated intensity of someone who has been told to smile and has decided to do it correctly. She looks like a tourist. She looks like someone's mother. She looks like a woman who has no idea that in 14 years, her son will be standing in their old house in Portland. The one they're selling because it's too expensive to maintain and too painful to visit. Holding this photograph and understanding, for the first time, exactly what she was reaching for. I've been trying to write this story for a long time. I keep starting it in the wrong place. Let me start here. I am 41 years old. My mother has been gone for 3 years. And 2 months ago, a stranger knocked on the door of our old house. The one we hadn't sold yet, the one I'd gone back to Portland to finally empty, and told me something about my mother that I did not know. Something she had kept from me for 20 years. Something I think she was trying to tell me in London, the autumn I graduated, when she stood on a park bench and pointed at the sky and said, "Look how low it is. You could just reach out and your hand would be in the clouds." I arrived in Portland on a Tuesday in late March, 2 years and 11 months after the funeral, which I had attended in a state of such profound numbness that I remembered almost none of it. My wife, Alice, had offered to come. I told her I needed to do this alone. That was partly true. The other part of the truth was that I didn't want her to see the house, because the house was the version of me I'd been running from for 20 years. The version who had been too busy becoming someone else to come home enough, to call enough, to sit across a dinner table from my mother in her own kitchen and ask her, "How are you really? What do you think about when you're alone?" The house was on a quiet street in the Selwood neighborhood, in a part of Portland that had been modest when I was a child and was now merely weathered, sandwiched between a new coffee shop and a construction site that had been a construction site for 6 years. The front steps still creaked, which didn't surprise me. The smell inside did not surprise me either, that particular combination of old wood, the lavender sachets she kept in every closet, and something indefinably specific to that house. That hallway, that part of my life that I had told myself I was not sentimental about. I had hired a company to do the actual moving. My job was to go through her things, the things in her study specifically, in the locked drawer she'd kept locked as long as I could remember, and decide what to keep. The drawer wasn't locked anymore. It hadn't been for years, my aunt told me. My mother had unlocked it sometime after I left for England and never said why. I sat down at her desk and opened it. Inside was a small stack of photographs. A folded letter I did not read right away. A pressed flower that had gone brown and papery, and a notebook with a blue cloth cover that I recognized immediately. It was the travel diary she'd kept during her trip to England. And underneath all of that, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was something I had never seen before. A second set of photographs from England. Not the ones I'd taken of her at the palace, at Hyde Park, at the little restaurants where she'd complained about the food. These were different. In these, she was alone. Or nearly alone. In some of them, she was sitting across from someone whose face I couldn't quite see, cut off at the frame's edge. At a café, at a bench along the Thames, at a table with cups of tea. I was looking at the photographs when someone knocked on the door. I thought it was the moving company arriving early. I almost didn't answer. The woman standing on the porch was perhaps 75 years old, small and neat in a dark blue coat. With the careful posture of someone who had once been told, she carried herself beautifully and had decided to maintain the standard. She had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, recognition and grief and something like relief, all mixed together. "You're her son," she said, not a question. "You look exactly like she said you would." Her name was Professor Alice Vance. She was a professor of comparative literature, retired now, but for 30 years she had taught at a university in Boston. She and my mother had met, she told me, at a community center book club in Portland. This was in 1995. I was 11 years old. "I didn't know she joined a book club," I said. Professor Vance smiled. "There are many things about your mother you don't know." She said it without cruelty. She said it the way someone says the sun rises in the east, not to wound, but because it is simply true, and she has lived with that truth long enough that it no longer startles her. We sat in the nearly empty house, 2 chairs I'd left out for the movers, a small folding table, a thermos of coffee she had brought with her because she'd guessed, she said, that I wouldn't have thought to buy any. She had been right. She poured us each a cup and set the thermos down and looked at me steadily. I came, she said, because I made her a promise. I was supposed to come sooner after she got sick, but I had my own health troubles, my memory. I have days when I can't find things. I wrote down what I needed to tell you to make sure I didn't lose it. She reached into her canvas tote and pulled out a small envelope. Don't open that yet, she said. Let me tell you first, so you understand the context. And so I sat in my mother's empty house in Portland while an elderly professor I had never met told me about the version of my mother I had never known. My mother had started attending that book club, Professor Vance explained, in the winter of 1995, after she overheard me telling my father that I wanted to go to university in another country someday. I was 11. I didn't mean it seriously, or rather, I meant it the way 11-year-olds mean things, with the full intensity of the moment and no understanding of what it would require. I had forgotten I'd said it by the following week. My mother had not. She thought if she stayed close to academics, to people with connections abroad, she could help you, Professor Vance said. Write recommendation letters, know the right people to call, be useful. She paused. She was relentless about it, very quietly relentless. I thought of my mother in London, looking at me with that expression I'd found so exasperating, the one where she clearly wanted to communicate with the shopkeeper but couldn't, and so stood there waiting for me to fix it. I had translated that expression, all those years, as helplessness. Now Professor Vance was telling me that my mother had spent 5 years building a quiet network of usefulness on my behalf, and I had never once noticed. She didn't stop after you left, Professor Vance said. She kept coming to the club, she read everything. She asked questions about everything. She learned enough to travel alone, to navigate airports, to read signs, to order from a menu in a foreign place slowly, but she could do it. She didn't tell me that, I said. My voice came out strange. No, she wouldn't have. She didn't want you to feel like you owed her something. She was very clear about that. Outside, from the construction site down the street, I could hear the groan and clank of heavy machinery, a sound I'd grown up with updated. What do the photographs mean? I asked. The ones with someone else. Professor Vance looked down at her coffee. That, she said, is a harder story. My mother went to England twice. I knew about one trip. The visit in October 2006 for my graduation, the month I've been carrying around in my memory for 20 years. The fleece jacket, the exasperated menu translations, the argument over my taxes, the bench in Hyde Park, the walk to Buckingham Palace. I did not know about the second trip. She went in March 2008, 18 months after my graduation. Alone. She planned it for almost a year, Professor Vance told me. She printed maps. She booked a small hotel near Paddington. Can you imagine? Your mother navigating London alone. A small, genuine smile. She was 62 years old. I tried to imagine it and could not. I tried to picture my mother navigating Heathrow alone, without me to help, pulling her carry-on bag through customs with her sensible shoes and that heavy copy of Lonely Planet. England she'd read until the spine cracked. My mother, who had looked wide-eyed and provincial, standing next to me, a student who'd already been there 5 years, going back on her own. Why? I asked. Why didn't she tell me she was going? Because, Professor Vance said carefully, she went to see something she couldn't explain to you without telling you something she wasn't ready to tell you. She reached into her tote bag again and produced one of the photographs I had found in the drawer, the ones with the half-visible person across the café table. That is her brother, she said. Your Uncle Eric, he has lived in London since 1987. I stared at her. She had a brother. Has. He is still alive. She told me she was an only child. Yes, Professor Vance said, she did. The construction site groaned. Somewhere below us, a door slammed. I looked at the photograph in my hand. My mother, caught mid-laugh at something the man across the table had said. And I could see it now in the line of her jaw, the shape of her ears. A resemblance I hadn't known to look for. And I felt the particular vertigo of realizing that the person you thought you knew completely was, in fact, a person with a private history that predated you entirely, that would outlast you, that you had never been entitled to simply because you were her child. Tell me, I said. His name was Eric. He was my mother's younger brother by 4 years. They had grown up together in a small town in rural Oregon, the children of a mill foreman and a schoolteacher, a childhood my mother had described to me in vivid, affectionate detail, the creek behind their property where they fished, the neighbor who always brought apples from his orchard in the fall, the first winter they had a color television. She had never, in all of those stories, mentioned Eric. Because in 1985, when my mother was 39 and Eric was 35, Eric had done something that shattered the family quietly and permanently. He had taken a research position in the UK through a university contact and simply not come back. He had sent letters for a few years. He had wired money occasionally. He had, in 1992, married a British woman named Jassy, and they had 2 children who were now in their 30s, children who were apparently my cousins, children I would never recognize on the street. My mother had not spoken to him for 21 years. "What changed?" I asked. "You," Professor Vance said. "When you went to England, she thought about it every day you were there in the same country not 2 hours from where he lived, and she thought, what if something happens to him and I never—" She was a practical woman, your mother. She didn't believe in wasted time. But she also couldn't just pick up the phone 21 years later because she was afraid. Not of him, of herself, of what she might say. So she asked you to help find him. She asked me to find his address. I had academic connections in London. It wasn't difficult. She wrote to him herself. And then she went. And then she went. I thought about March 2008. I had been living in New York by then, newly employed, newly married, in the first year of a career that had immediately consumed everything else. I would have called my mother. I called every 2 weeks, more or less, with the particular regularity of a person who is meeting an obligation rather than answering a need. She would have been warm and interested, and asked about Alice, and not mentioned that she had just returned from London, where she had sat across a café table from her estranged brother, and heard 21 years of his life in the condensed, careful grammar of 2 people who still love each other and have forgotten how to say so. "Did they reconcile?" I asked. Professor Vance was quiet for a moment. "They began. They wrote letters. They planned for him to visit Portland. Your mother wanted to show him the old neighborhood, the creek, all of it." She paused. "But then she got sick. 2017. 2016 first. The early stages. She didn't tell you that either." "No. She had told me in 2018, after the diagnosis had progressed to something undeniable, after it had a name and a prognosis, and required me to make decisions about things I hadn't been asked to weigh in on before, like what kind of treatment and where and who would be there. By then I had been living in Chicago for 3 years. By then Alice and I had a daughter. By then I had what my mother in her proudest moments called a real life now, a proper life. I had not understood then that she meant a life that will survive without me. That evening, after Professor Vance left, after she'd pressed the envelope into my hands and made me promise to read it before I left the house for good, I sat alone in the dark on the floor of my mother's study and read the travel diary. It was not a literary document. It was practical in the way she was practical, detailed in the way she was detail-oriented. Bus routes, exchange rates, observations about the weather. She had stapled a receipt from a café near the Thames to one page. She had drawn a small map of the area around her hotel so she wouldn't get lost. But every few pages there was a sentence that stopped me. March 14. Took the tube alone for the first time, got on the wrong line, then figured it out. A young man helped me without being asked. I said thank you and he said cheers and smiled. I was very happy about this. March 16. Found the café near Covent Garden. Eric was already there. He looks old. I suppose I do too. We did not hug at first. Then after a while we did. He smells different than I remember. Jassy has taught him to use different soap. March 18. Went to Hyde Park. There is a bench where I sat with John when he was upset about his taxes that last autumn. I sat there again today. I thought he sat here. He was frustrated. I didn't know what to do. I just sat with him. Maybe that was all I needed to do. Maybe that's all anyone can do. March 20. Eric asked if John knows about him. I said no. He asked why not. I said I didn't know how to explain something I was still ashamed of. He said, "Ashamed of what? That I left, or that you never forgave me?" I didn't answer. I thought about it for the whole train ride back. March 21. Eric came to the hotel. He brought his children, my niece and nephew, 18 and 20 years old. My nephew David has my father's ears. It was very shocking. We had lunch at a small Italian place near the hotel. The food was good. I paid, March 22, last day. Eric walked me to the tube station. Before I went down the stairs, I asked him to send me a photograph of himself every year on his birthday, something to show John. Someday I will know how to explain it. Note to self, tell Alisa that I want her to tell him if I can't. He should know Eric exists. He should know the family is bigger than he thinks. He deserves to know where he comes from. I sat on the floor of my mother's study until well past midnight. Outside, the street hummed with the ordinary sounds of a Portland evening. A car passing. Someone's dog barking twice and going quiet, the distant rhythm of a freight train moving through. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor had their window open and music drifting out, something old and unhurried. I opened the envelope. The letter was dated 3 months before her death. She had written it by hand, in her neat, slightly formal cursive, on the good cream stationery she kept in the locked drawer, the drawer that wasn't locked anymore. Because sometime after I left for England, she had decided that she was no longer hiding anything, only waiting. To John, I have been thinking about how to write this letter for a very long time, and I have decided that the problem is that I keep trying to explain myself, and I should stop. You don't need an explanation. You need the facts. The facts are these: you have an uncle. His name is Eric. He lives in London in a neighborhood called Hackney. He is 73 years old and retired, and he walks along the canal every morning, and he likes to cook, which he learned from his wife Jassy, who died 4 years ago. He has a daughter named Alyssa and a son named David. David has your grandfather's ears. I was angry at your uncle for a long time. I was angry because he left, and because leaving seemed easy for him and staying was hard for me, and I thought for many years that he chose ease over family. Then I went to England and I sat across from him, and I understood that leaving wasn't easy. He has spent 30 years in a country where he started over from nothing, building a life from scratch, loving people who didn't share his earliest memories. He gave up everything I had. He traded one kind of hardship for another, and he didn't even know he was doing it until it was done. I think you may understand what I'm describing. I'm not asking you to forgive him for not being in your life. I'm asking you to consider that he didn't know he was missing from it. That's my fault, the fault of my silence. He would have liked you. He still would, I think. Now here is the thing I should have told you years ago and didn't because I was proud and stubborn. When you first went to England, I was terrified. Not for you, I knew you were capable. I was terrified because I knew what it meant. I knew that once you went, the world would get bigger for you than it was for me, and you would love the bigger world, and I would be in the small world waiting. I knew this because it had happened before, because Eric had done it first. I sent you anyway. I sent you because I had already learned from Eric that keeping people in the small world to protect yourself is not love. It is only fear dressed in love's clothing. But here is what I didn't understand until London. I was afraid you would leave the way Eric left. That I would wave goodbye to you at the airport, and the world would swallow you up, and you would send letters and wire money and become someone I didn't recognize, someone who smells like different soap. And then you came back. You came back and you had changed, of course you had, you were supposed to, but you still knew how to carry my bag. You still knew when I needed to find a restroom. You still knew which page of the guidebook to turn to. I have thought about this often in the years since, about how relief feels different when you've been afraid for a long time, about the bench in Hyde Park where you sighed and took my hand. I need you to know this. I was not the one who taught you how to take care of people. You were born knowing. I was just the first person you practiced on. Attached to this letter is a photograph. It is from March 2008. I am sitting in a café in London with your Uncle Eric. You can't see his face. He was embarrassed by the camera. But I want you to have it. You've probably found the one where I'm reaching up at the sky in front of the palace. I've always liked that one. I want you to have this one too. The sky is lower there. You can reach the clouds if you try. I love you. Mom, I called Eric from the airport. It took me 3 days to find his number. Professor Vance had it, of course. But I needed 3 days first, to pack up the house and take the photographs off the walls and stand in my mother's kitchen one last time and let myself feel the full weight of the room. The table where we'd eaten 10,000 dinners, the window she'd kept plants on. The particular way the afternoon light hit the floor at 4 o'clock in a way I had never consciously noticed, but had apparently stored somewhere deep in my nervous system, because standing in it now felt like being embraced. I took the photograph off the wall, the one from London, the one where she's reaching. I wrapped it in a sweater and packed it in my bag. The movers took the rest. Eric picked up on the 3rd ring. He sounded surprised. Then he sounded like someone who has been waiting for a phone call for a very long time and had given up hope of it coming. She told me, I said. She left a letter. A pause. She told me about you, he said finally. Everything she remembered, your graduation, the bench in the park, the walk to the palace. His voice was careful. She was very proud of you. I didn't know you existed, I said. I meant it as a fact, not an accusation. I think he heard it as a fact. I know, I'm sorry for that. I would have, he stopped, started again. I wanted to come to the funeral. She asked me not to. She said you were already overwhelmed and she didn't want you to have to explain me. Even in that, I thought. Even in her dying, she was protecting me from having to sort through something complicated. She was always doing that, I said. Yes, Eric said. She was. We talked for 2 hours. I sat in the departure lounge at Portland International and learned 20 years of my uncle's life in the compressed, careful grammar of two strangers who share blood. I learned that he had tried to come back in 1993 and had been too afraid. That he had written to my mother every year on her birthday until 2001, when she stopped writing back. That when she had finally written to him in 2007, the letter Professor Vance had helped her send, he had read it so many times the paper had gone soft. I learned that he had a grandson now, David's son, a boy named Vance who was 4 years old and reportedly obsessed with dinosaurs, and showed no signs of resembling anyone in particular, except that he liked to take photographs and was very particular about the angle and the height of the scenery, and would make you take the same photo 5 times until it was right. My mother had never met Vance. My mother had never met David's wife, or Alice's husband, or the children who came after. A whole generation of family that had grown up in London while I grew up in Portland, parallel and unknowing. I'm coming to London, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. I said it the way my mother had said to me 20 years ago on a bench in Hyde Park, I want to go to the bathroom, not as a request, as a fact that had only just become possible to admit. When? Eric said. I don't know, soon, I need to. I thought about it. About Alice, who would be surprised and supportive in equal measure. About our own daughter, who was 11 years old, who had said last month that she wanted to go to university abroad someday, and had meant it with the full intensity of the moment and no understanding of what it would require. I need to tell my daughter about her great-uncle first. A sound from Eric's side, not quite a laugh, something closer to relief. She knows about dinosaurs. She does. Then Vance will like her. I thought on the plane home about what my mother had written. I need you to know this. I was not the one who taught you how to take care of people. You were born knowing. She was wrong about that. Mothers usually are when it comes to this particular kind of credit-taking. I was not born knowing. I learned it in increments without understanding I was learning in the small moments when someone needed something I could provide, and I provided it, and nobody made a big thing of it, and we moved on. The way she had learned it before me. The way Eric had learned it differently in a different country for different people. The way I thought my daughter was already learning it in the small daily gestures I barely noticed. The way she put an extra blanket on my lap when I fell asleep on the sofa. The way she always remembered which dishes Alice couldn't eat. The way she took the photographs at dinner until everyone looked right in them, unhurried, getting the angle perfect. My mother had been wrong about the teaching, but she had been exactly right about something else. Some knowledge isn't taught. It's transmitted. Silently, through proximity, through watching, through the accumulation of ordinary moments that don't look like lessons until you're 41 years old on a plane home from your mother's empty house, holding a letter, understanding everything too late and just in time. I went to London in September. I brought Alice and I brought our daughter, Jassy, who is the kind of child who walks into unfamiliar places and immediately begins making friends, who charmed Vance within 15 minutes by knowing, correctly, that stegosauruses have thagomizers on their tails and not, as many people wrongly believe, just generic spikes. Eric met us at the airport. He is 73 years old and has my grandfather's posture, which I know because I've seen the photographs. He has a way of standing with his hands clasped behind his back that my mother never mentioned in any of her stories, but that I recognized the moment I saw it. She stood the same way in the London photographs, in the ones where she's waiting for me to figure out the bus route or read the menu or ask the clerk which aisle the flour is in. Patient, contained, trusting that the answer would come. He looked at me for a long moment in the arrivals hall, the way you look at someone when you're trying to find the person you've heard about inside the person in front of you. You have her eyes, he said. So does my daughter, I said. He looked at Jassy, who was already looking at the departures board with the focused interest of someone cataloging interesting information. Good, he said simply. We did not hug right away. Then, after a while, we did. On the third day, I took Jassy to Hyde Park. We walked along the path I had walked with my mother 20 years ago. The trees were different, older, thicker, or maybe thinned by storms and replanted, I couldn't be sure. The light was the same. That particular early autumn diffusion, milky and warm, the kind that made everything look like a memory even while you were inside it. I found the bench. I'm not certain it was the exact bench. There are many benches in Hyde Park. But it was in the right area, in a spot where you could see a stretch of sky above the tree line, wide and low, and gray-edged in the way that London's sky has of seeming closer to the ground than sky anywhere else. We sat for a while without saying anything. Jassy had her phone out, photographing a squirrel with the methodical patience of someone who will take 17 shots and keep the best one. "Dad," she said, without looking up. "Yeah, is this where you came with Grandma?" "Somewhere around here." She lowered the phone, looked at the sky. She has her grandmother's eyes and my mother's tendency toward directness, and a patience that she must have gotten from somewhere I haven't found yet. "What did she say?" she asked. "She pointed at the sky," I said. "She said it was so low you could reach out and touch the clouds." Jassy looked at the sky for a moment, considering it with the same focused attention she'd given the squirrel. Then she raised her hand, fingers spread, reaching, not quite believing she could touch it, but trying. "She was right," she said. "It kind of looks like you could." I didn't say anything. I watched my daughter's hand against the London sky, and I thought about my mother at 62 years old, alone in a hotel near Paddington with her cracked-spine guidebook, and her quiet determination, and her brother sitting across a café table in Covent Garden. And I thought about Eric walking her to the tube station on her last morning, watching her go down the stairs, not knowing it would be the last time they were in the same city. I thought about all the things we don't say because we're waiting to say them better. I thought about how my mother had unlocked the drawer and left everything in it and not moved it for 17 years. Waiting. Not hiding, waiting. There is a difference, and I understand it now in a way I couldn't have understood at 26 or 35 or even last year. Hiding is about shame, but waiting is about faith. She had faith that I would come back to the house. Faith that I would open the drawer. Faith that I had learned enough of the world by now to understand what she'd been trying to do, not protect me from Eric's existence, but protect me from having to carry it until I was ready to. I had not been ready at 26. I was not sure I was entirely ready now. But I was here, and the drawer was open, and the sky was low enough to touch. Jassy put her phone away and leaned against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, with the unconscious confidence of someone who knows they are welcome to occupy the space. "Can we go see Uncle Eric again tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I promised Vance I'd bring him a dinosaur book. We'll find one. A good one with accurate information." "Of course." We sat on the bench for a long time, my daughter and I, the way you sit when nowhere else is more important than where you are. The sky went slowly pink at the horizon, the way London sky does in October, diffidently, as if it hadn't decided yet. Below us, the park filled and emptied with the easy commerce of an ordinary afternoon. Joggers and couples and people walking dogs, and a group of children in school uniforms moving in a loose cluster, supervised by a tired-looking teacher. A woman stopped near our bench to take a photograph. She was perhaps 60, wearing a sensible coat, pulling a small suitcase. She held her phone up and squinted at the screen, dissatisfied with the angle. I almost offered to take it for her. Before I could, Jassy stood up. "Excuse me," she said. "Would you like me to take it? I'm good with cameras." The woman looked surprised, then pleased. She handed over the phone. Jassy stepped back, considered the frame, adjusted her angle twice, and took 3 shots in quick succession. "There," she said, returning the phone. "The middle one is the best." The woman looked at the photos and beamed. "Oh, wonderful, thank you, dear," she walked on, rolling her suitcase. Jassy sat back down beside me and picked up her own phone again as though nothing had happened. As though it were simply obvious that you help when you can, as though it required no explanation. I thought, she doesn't know she learned that. She just knows it, I thought, this is how it works. This is how it gets carried. The sky, low and soft and finally committing to its pink, hung above the trees just close enough to touch. I reached up one hand, fingers open. Not quite believing, trying anyway.